So Iran might actually be in trouble. I mean, Israel has effectively neutered their air defense, and the United States is stacking more military assets in the Middle East than we have in decades. It's a lot of firepower. That's what I talk about today with Andrew Fox before shifting over to some updates around the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. Now, Andrew's a former soldier who actually overlapped in Afghanistan back in 2010. Small war, small militaries. He's also a research fellow specializing in the Middle East and defense, and he runs one of the top world politics newsletters on Substack. So be sure to check that out. That link will be in the description below. And with that, let's get to the conversation. All right, Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time, man. I want to jump right in here with the big question as of late, Iran. Are we in a period of time right now where there might be an opening to take some sort of action related to Iran's nuclear program?
Well, we've seen so much, conflicting reporting here. The main headline is that most analysts seem to think they're a maximum of 1 week away from being able to get enough nuclear material for a warhead. I've seen other reporting that says they have one already, but they don't have the means to dispatch it, so they haven't got the rockets. And that tallies with what we know of Israel's attack earlier last year, when they specifically hit rocket sites and their rocket making abilities. So there's some mixed up reporting here, but I think the amount of American hardware we're seeing shifted into the Gulf right now is unprecedented. And I don't think you need that to threaten. I mean, that's a very, very expensive way of threatening someone, because everyone knows what America's military power looks like. It's not like it's a secret how much ordnance they can bring to bear if they want to. So I suspect that this is a prelude to actually striking that nuclear facility in due course.
Well, it's interesting because I feel like for a long and still today, the focus is looking at the Iranian proxies and how effective those are at kind of setting up a shield of trying to go after Tehran.
Hmm.
But we've seen since October 7th, kind of one after the other, not intentional by the IRGC, but it's kind of interesting looking back now. October 7th may have kind of opened this door because Hamas is now pretty battered. Hezbollah, same. Assad, gone. And the Houthis tied up down in Yemen to a degree. So it feels to me at least like the proxy network maybe isn't as strong today, probably weaker today than it has been ever. You think that's accurate?
Yeah, I'd agree absolutely. And on top of that, Israel have absolutely deleted Iran's air defenses. So they're about as vulnerable as they could possibly be right now. The only proxy that's still going is the one in Iraq. So we've seen reports just in the last couple of days that the IRGC are pushing munitions to that proxy in Iraq. So should anything happen, I'd imagine that the Iranian response would be to try and use that one proxy that they've got left to try and score some hits in revenge. The only issue with that is they refuse to go and fight for Assad. There's reports that they were ordered to go and get stuck in. They've also been ordered not to respond to increased attacks on Yemen. So there's a real desire not to burn that proxy. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Well, those proxies too. I feel like something that's always lost in the cards here is they have their own self-interest. The guys in charge of those groups, they want power and control and money. They don't want to die just for nothing. So it's not completely cannon fodder. And I think was it the attack on Jordan that killed a couple American service members? I think it was Kataib Hezbollah or some others just said, "Cool, we're out. We're gonna stop for a little while, guys." And you kind of saw it,
Yeah.
like they weren't lockstep with Iran. So I guess that's possible too.
Yeah, and it's far more nuanced than people think. I think the target of this proxy ring was always Israel. It's not so much that they want to hit America. It's not so much that they want to kind of attack Saudi Arabia or any of those other sort of more benign Arab states in the Gulf. This has always been about Israel. And with that kind of ability to strike Israel taken away, obviously their motivation is not to just die on the wrong end of American tomahawks. So that makes a lot of sense to me.
You were talking a second ago about the destruction of some of Iran's air defense, and I wanted to get your take on that because I feel like we go in every direction on this one, right? You got Russia as the second best military in the world, and then they can't topple Ukraine. Then we've got Hezbollah is going to rain down missiles and drones on Tel Aviv the minute that Israel moves into southern Lebanon, and well, that didn't happen. So I feel like we've got this mixed story out of Iran where it's a capable air defense network, but at the same time we're hearing, Israel has done some work against it. How do you think it stacks up now?
I think it's deleted, absolutely
Really? Okay.
deleted. The F-35s have turned out to be completely untouchable by those S-300 and S-400 missile defense systems. And I've I also sat, when I was in the army, I sat in war games where the Air Force were predicting they'd take 60% casualties against those S-400s. And I think people were genuinely concerned that Russia was a military superpower. And as we've seen in Ukraine, they're an absolute damn squib. So it's certainly turned a few preconceptions on their heads, I think.
The Israeli-American cooperation, how would you see something like this playing out? Completely hypothetical, of course, but you mentioned a second ago that kind of the Iranian focus is always on Israel, and I think the viewers and listeners understand that. But a lot of the movement recently has been American assets into the region. B-2 bombers to Diego Garcia, another carrier strike group just showed up. How do you see this playing out with the U.S. alongside Israel?
Everything the White House has been saying, I think it's going to be an American lead. I'd be surprised if Israel had anything to do but a sort of bit part. If I were looking at this holistically, I would say that Israel's probably going to be in a defensive posture because if Iran, the worst case scenario, if they're attacked, is they try and fire everything they've got at Tel Aviv. And of course, if they do have a nuclear warhead already, then that's a really big deal. So I would see the Israelis in a defensive posture whilst the Americans take the offensive posture. And that would make the most sense to me, given the amount of asset, because the Israelis can't cope. They can't compete with B-52s and B-2s and the higher end, heavier American kit. So there's not really a huge amount for them to do, especially when they've already, spent a lot of those defense stores on defending against Iranian attacks twice last year. So yeah, I think that's the way it plays out. Israel takes a defensive posture to stop a counterattack. America goes on the offense.
I mean, if you really step back, this is one of those things where if we look back in 10 years, if this attack were to happen, you would probably say that already it's a joint U.S.-Israeli attack because Israel's effect on the air defense assets. So
Mm.
right now, that might seem like months ago, but down the road, that could very well play as phase one of this larger operation.
Yeah, the shaping operations, if we want to call it that, that's exactly what Israel's done.
It's interesting. Well, I want to shift over to Gaza before too long here. And a question I have for you here, sir, is it seems like ceasefire was on the table for a long time. That was the goal. We were moving towards that. There was phase one in place. I feel like I haven't heard the term ceasefire out of Gaza or out of Israel in a while now. Is it completely off the table? Is it on the back burner? What's that look like from your perspective?
No, I think what Israel's doing at the moment is trying to balance immediate and longer term aims. So there's always been a strategic tension at the heart of Israel's mission in Gaza, and that is it's very difficult to destroy Hamas and to get the hostages back. They look kind of mutually exclusive for a long time. And so what I think Israel's doing now is trying to squeeze Hamas back to the negotiating table and get a ceasefire deal on Israel's terms by taking chunks of ground, by annihilating his senior leadership, who absolutely dropped the ball during the last ceasefire. They inadvertently handed Israel so much intelligence with those stupid parades of hostage returns. Um, and we've seen time and time again now that senior administrators and senior Hamas commanders are getting deleted because Israel have now been able to track them from those hostage release farragos. And um, they're also at the same time as trying to squeeze Hamas back to the negotiating table, they're trying to aim off for their longer term aims of actually getting rid of Hamas completely. So if they do have to end up taking up a full occupation of Gaza, they're doing as much work as they can now to make sure they get as easy a ride as possible if they do come to full occupation, which nobody wants. I think they want the negotiations to go along the lines of hostages returned, Hamas agree to leave Gaza forever, and hand over to some other kind of administration. But I think Israel's keeping all these options on the table now, and it's a real paradigm shift since that last four-week ceasefire in January, and obviously the new chief of staff taking over.
On that note, we've seen more kind of aggressive rhetoric recently from Israel. Defense Minister Katz talking about, we're going to do it different this time. We're not stopping. This is going to be it. This is the final push. What does that look like though? Because from my perspective, it was hard to see outside of some certain scenarios where Israel really held back. It didn't seem like they were going in with the kid gloves. So it seems like fewer troops in Gaza right now. What do you think? Like, what are the tactics that are changing? What is the strategy that changes that's going to make this time the push that much different?
Well, to start with, you've got a heavily degraded Hamas. They're down to below 20% of their original fighting strength. And yes, they can recruit more, but these are untrained recruits. Very often, they're underage soldiers. They're not hugely useful in a fight against the IDF. I mean, anyone can pick up an RPG and fire it, but it takes a lot to actually do some damage with an RPG against a proper professional military that has things like the defensive suites that you see on those Merkava tanks. And even the professional sort of high-end Hamas fighters haven't really landed any punches on the IDF's armor. Last July, I was speaking to one of their divisions, and they'd lost 4 vehicles in the whole campaign. Loads more sort of damage, but every single one of those damaged ones returned to the fight. They'd only had K-kill 4 vehicles in the whole campaign. So Hamas incredibly degraded is the first thing. The second thing is the White House were putting brakes on Israel. I mean, you look at the 4-month gap between January and April 24, between completing Khan Yunis and going into Rafah.
Mhm.
That was entirely White House kind of imposed. And now clearly Mr. Trump has given them carte blanche to get stuck in. And so these are really important factors. And they're also showing a willingness to seize more terrain. I think they own 20% of Gaza now. They've taken a fifth of the terrain and they're holding it, which is something we never saw before because they were going around this raiding strategy. So I think the one thing that really does kind of hurt Hamas is that loss of terrain. And that sort of ever-present threat that the Israelis just aren't going to give it back. Now, I don't think that's going to happen. I think they don't have any real intention of seizing and keeping it forever. But what they do want to do is put that squeeze on to get some sort of negotiation and hostage release over the table.
So that's a good point. It's less about an entirely new strategy and more just continuing to press, continuing to pressure until there's nothing left to hold out. I want to go back to the you mentioned only 4 vehicles destroyed, which is insane for the urban combat these guys were seeing. I feel like we didn't see a lot about IEDs, and I, for one, was expecting to see a lot about IEDs. Not to say they didn't happen, and we definitely saw some footage from Hamas even showing these different IED strikes. Was that not that much of a tactic? Or did Israel just
No,
have
it absolutely
countermeasures?
was. I've interviewed sort of private, low-level grunts from the IDF, just to get the soldier's eye view. And there were loads of IDs. Absolutely. In Rafah, almost every other house had one. But what the Israelis have
Jesus.
done is they've pioneered the use of bulldozers at scale. We're talking 90 dozers going in there, the D9s. And a lot of them are remote control as well, which is really a complete development in doing it this way. And they just send the dozers in and bulldoze the street. And if something goes bang, that's fine because they're armored bulldozers. It doesn't really matter, especially if they're the remote ones that don't have a driver to worry about. So they've had IEDs to face, but they've had a totally different approach to dealing with them. In Rafah, they were finding IEDs in the tunnels in the houses with cameras overwatching them. They had cabled cameras down into the tunnel so they could see when the IDF entered. And the IDF changed tactics. So they'd send in a drone first. If the drone didn't find anything, they'd send in a dog. If the dog didn't find anything, they'd send in no more than a 4-man squad to minimize the risk of losing a whole platoon, or even more in a single IED strike. And if they did find an IED, they'd just pull back and drop the building. So it's a completely different sort of strategy to the ones that you and I would be familiar with from the Middle East or from Afghanistan, where everything would stop and you'd call out EOD and try and defuse it. There are actually too many to even think about doing that
Yeah.
tactic. They'd be there all forever if they tried to. So it's loads of IEDs, but a totally different way of dealing with them.
I remember seeing some of the backup cameras in the cars. That footage that Hamas was using was pretty. I mean, it's
Mm.
one of those where it's innovative and it's smart. Hate to see it, but they know what they're doing. I guess it feels like the IDF adapted incredibly fast to that threat because some of the stuff you're describing going from, and there were events early in the war where it was, I don't know if it was an entire platoon, but at least a squad size element would be in a building and it was brought down.
Mm.
It'd be a mass casualty event. So to so quickly go from that to drones, dogs, and fire teams, like I know, I think most people would say, yeah, you do that right away, but man, the military's slow. We adjust very
Yeah.
at a very slow pace. So it's impressive to see that they've adapted that quickly.
Yeah, and we never did that in Afghanistan. We our adaptation was to get kind of over safe, and I don't know if you remember seeing the dudes on the ground, in a snake behind the Valen machines, the mine detectors, and
That's right.
losing all possibility of any maneuver whatsoever. And they've been much more innovative than that. But then again, they've got a much higher sort of appetite for collateral destruction in Gaza because it's a very different kind of war. Whereas we were trying to win the hearts and minds of the Afghan people, whereas they're very much not trying to do that in Gaza.
It's a very different war. There's no two ways about it. Is there anywhere in it looks like right now the IDF is pushing more into the Rafah area. Is there anywhere you have your eye on in Gaza where it's, oh, that's gonna be a hot spot. This is an area they haven't spent much time in. Any place in particular you're looking out?
Yeah, central camps. That's the bit they never really touched in the last kind of round of fighting. And the simple reason was the hostages were there.
Okay.
And even today, Hamas have put out a threat saying we're keeping the hostages in areas you're likely to hit. So they're playing games with the hostages. And the IDF have throughout this entire war have had a no strike policy. They've got a very good intelligence network tracking hostage location. So they've got a very good idea where the hostages are. It's just getting to them that's the issue. And they tried that one hostage rescue operation, Operation Arnon, which was successful, but it was minutes from being a total disaster. That was so close to being, the Israeli special forces on the ground getting wiped out by 300 Hamas. And it was only because of the very clever positioning of the reserve and then airstrikes that stopped that being a complete, a complete nightmare. So they've got a low appetite, I think, for that kind of hostage rescue operation. And Hamas have developed, they've evolved as well. They've now got direct threat to the hostage 24/7. It makes it very difficult to recover them by any military means.
Has there been I feel like there's been rumors of this. I don't know if it's been confirmed, but have there been instances where hostages have been killed as Israeli forces approach, or is that just a there have okay.
Yeah, so the six that were killed last, I think it was July maybe. Hirsch Goldberg Poland and Aiden
Okay. Yeah.
Yerushalmi, that group. Yeah, the suspicion is that the IDF were closing in. It was Sinwar's personal kind of hostage crew that he had with him. They were slowing down Sinwar's escape, and as the IDF closed in, they executed them. So um, there's absolutely evidence that they're prepared to stoop that low.
It's an impossible task. It's being asked to go in there and get these guys and gals, back. Now, before I jump into this last thing here, I do want to say be sure to check out Andrew's Substack. Incredible resource over there. It'll be linked in the description and the pinned comment. But Andrew, I was doing a video yesterday talking about how the Telegraph just came out saying that Hamas had fabricated some numbers in their casualty reporting through the Gaza Ministry of Health. And I'm reading the Telegraph article, and it cited your work from like December,
It is.
saying essentially the exact same thing. So, did that line up kind of one for one with what you were looking at a few months ago?
Yeah, yeah, it did. It's been a very validating week for that paper. Everything we had in there turned out to be true. So we said there were thousands of errors and thousands of natural deaths. Hamas have confirmed it. We said that by proportion it was overwhelmingly fighting age males dying. Hamas's own figures have confirmed that as well. We said they were concealing combatant deaths. That's been proven true. So, it's been a very kind of a very academically validating week for me. Because you put these papers out there and you do think to yourself, goodness, what if I'm wrong? I'm going to look like a complete fool.
That's right.
So
Your
to
name's
to
on it,
have
man.
have Hamas themselves confirm it, then there you go. The work was solid, and I'm pretty proud of it.
It seems like in the last couple of weeks, we've seen Hamas announcing the deaths of their fighters more than in the past. Because
Mm.
to your point, you said they were hiding combatant deaths, and it's like, well, they just didn't say anything about it at all. So, like,
Yeah.
yeah, we have no idea what it was. But it does seem like recently, is that a change in tactics? Is it just is there anything to that they're actually
It's
announcing
what
these
they
deaths
always do.
now?
It's the same pattern as always, and I think they genuinely thought the war was over.
Okay.
I genuinely think they did and that's why they were sort of tweaking the Israelis and needling them with those hostage release, um, you know, those appalling displays they put on of those coffins coming home and parading the hostages around. I think that was genuinely them thinking they'd won, by which I mean they survived and the war was over. And so that's what they always do is after during the war they just give totals and they claim they're all civilians, and then after the war they start releasing the fact it was actually significantly large numbers of combatants. Um, because their aim by releasing these numbers is to get international communities to stop Israel. and it's worked. It's worked in every conflict beforehand. This time the Israelis weren't stopping, but yeah, they've lost that lever now, because they just failed to realize what was coming if they didn't send all the hostages home.
Well, good on you. Good research, digging into that and figuring it out. But we'll go ahead and wrap there again. Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time. Everybody, if you haven't already, head down, check out Andrew's Substack. Link in the description and the pinned comment as well. Andrew, really appreciate the time, sir.
Thank you so much.
All right, so if you stuck around this long, thank you so much. Hope you enjoyed the conversation with Andrew. Be sure to follow him on X and check out his Substack newsletter. It really is like one of the best resources I've come across in a long time. He's 100% worth a follow. But again, thank you so much to Andrew for taking the time to come on and chat. Hope you all have a great weekend. That's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.